Hey everyone, my name is Tammy Davis, and I want to thank you for joining me today's video. If you're new to my channel, check it out. There's an evolution occurring right before your very eyes with these videos. I started recording them back in the fall of 2015, so for 4.5 years. And things have changed, but I invite you to check it out because I'm not going to hide anything. And I say that because I would never did anything maliciously. There's simply an evolution occurring in my work through a series of experiences, life experiences, and so, yeah, so welcome. Thanks for checking it out, and let me know if you have any questions. You're invited to join my Aromatherapy is a Lifestyle Facebook group. The link is in the description box below. Sign up for a newsletter. Just kind of get involved. Because, like I said, this is definitely an evolution of a modality. Because just to give you a little bit of background, and for those of you who've been with me this whole time, thank you very much. Thanks for your patience through this little segment here. Feel free to skip ahead if you don't want to listen to this spiel again. But for those of you who do not know me, my background spans well over 30 years. It started out in pharmacology. I am a internationally certified master clinical aromatherapist, which is the reason why I talk about essential oils. I've studied under organic and biochemists. Don't work out of a book, don't represent a company other than my own. It's just been a field in development. And I'm not going to lie and tell you that I didn't start out like everybody else, which was absolutely for symptom relief, because everybody who is in the health and wellness field is out to help people feel good in their skin. Nobody wants to be uncomfortable. So that's really where I went with this. And although I do have a background in pharmacology, I was learning so much about the plant. So in addition to doing all that back then, over all this time that continues to go on today, is the investigation into plant constituents and the way they relate to human physiology and drug development. Now, this is substantial in the sense that we're paying attention to individual constituents. And mind you, an essential oil is comprised of any number of constituents. It's a chemistry experiment. I mean, it's a chemical reaction. An essential oil is basically a chemical reaction, and how it responds in one individual is not going to be like everybody else's. Yes, we have books of properties listed. We have websites with properties listed on them, but I issue caution all the time because just because something says eucalyptus does not make it. There's 8 different types of eucalyptus, at least. Same thing can be said for lavender. I mean, basically any oil that you see has a variety to it because there's different plant types. And then even with the same species, even if it's the same type, growing in 2 different locations, you're going to come up with a different oil. I mean, I just got some new oils and truthfully, they don't smell the same. I've actually had to go back to my producers and go, okay, make sure that what's going on. Is this just completely entirely different growing season? I mean, what's changed in this batch? And so, because they just don't smell the same, and we don't always have that experience. Although I've had it with over the years, I've seen it consistently. Between different producers, the oils just smell differently. And again, this is because the growing, the quality, the environment is changing. The temperatures, the light, the water, the soil nutrition, all of it is different. So even if it's, again, the same type of lavender, whether it's grown in, Madagascar or in Utah, again, it's going to be different. So knowing what's in your bottle constituent wise is important. And this is really where I come at all of this. And I've really, again, started out in symptom relief and then was introduced to those 23andMe tests and all of the results that show up as a result of taking these various different, and I know 23andMe is not the only one, but there's a number of genetic testing companies out there that you can volunteer some saliva and get a report generated. And there's a challenge that I have with that because that's a snapshot in time. Number one, it suggests potential problems. So it's now getting into kind of easing you into doing some sort of nutraceuticals. And for the most part, the nutraceutical companies, it's biotechnology. And so a lot of them are being run by people who either used to work in pharmaceuticals or in the pharmaceutical industry, or are still involved with the pharmaceutical industry, or for that matter, they are a division of a pharmaceutical company. So there comes down to mass marketing, and I just these tests, while they are, they are legitimate in the way that they are showing you what's going on with your genes at this moment, are not necessarily indicative of what you're going to come down with. Basically, I don't believe degenerative disease is it's not inherited. The only what is inherited is our thoughts and behaviors. And I mean that with all due respect, but as parents, we talk around our children, we talk to our children. They observe us. This is how we've come up with the properties for the oils. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. But a lot of this is based on observation. The thoughts and behaviors that we adopt as adults. And how many times have you said, God, I sound like my mother? Or man, I'm just like my father. There's these thoughts and behaviors that we've adopted, and therefore these are what contribute to degeneration in our health. That and the environment, and that's really the point of this video. So even though I am an aromatherapist by certification, I have taken the last 25 years really and explored the human genome, like I said, the organic and biochemistry, human physiology, and even consistent investigation into the individual constituents, that once they look at an oil, like I said, it can have any number of constituents in it. And science cannot tell you. They're still baffled. But I mean, sometimes people call it synergy. I call it synergy. That's the reason why my business is called Synergescence. But it's a chemical reaction. That's what synergy is. It's a chemical reaction. And when you have a bottle of, say, 50 constituents, they're not all sitting over there doing their happy dance in their own little bubble. They're commingling. Okay, that is a chemical reaction. And although we can observe the relief, we can observe how these oils affect people, whether it be for a cut or whether it be for sleep or for anxiety, right? We can observe how it affects somebody. And a lot of these properties are passed on from history. But then again, I'm only pausing because I don't want to just like be speaking without being aware of what I'm trying to say. It is a lot of historical information passed forward. Robert Tisserand, who's somebody that I've actually met, is responsible for translating Gara Fosse's book on aromatherapy. There were people who worked with oils and plants even further back, and a lot of our understanding of how plants work. Yes, there were a lot of documentation from our ancestors, and they observed how plants affected animals. Then they began observing how they were affecting one another. It's not like we all knew what a toxic plant was. Sometimes somebody actually accidentally ate a toxic plant, and either they tripped out or they died, So through these observations, we were able to identify properties. However, the planet is not the same. Our world right now, our environment right now is so drastically different than it was 100 years ago, let alone 1,000 years ago. Not to mention the fact that the human body has evolved significantly. They've that what I'm aware of at this point, they've identified 64 major changes to the genome, and it's not a bad thing. It was all for our evolution. I mean, the one big one, significant one that I talk about all the time is during the Black Plague. Over 7 million people, no, 7 million people, 70 million people, 70 million people, I think was the number. The 7 and a million, but I think it was 30 million people. Anyway, died from the plague. And yet all of a sudden we're here. It's because somebody in our genes, our lineage survived. And how it survived is what they've identified is there's a significant imprint to the immune system that occurred around that time. And all it was the body going, well, this species, or the DNA realizing that something had to change. And because there was so much happening, and this is why I talk a lot about stress and environmental stress. There was so much going on that it activated a change, a significant change within the human genome, and that is the reason why we're here. This is the nature of our existence. This is the reason why plants are here. And this is the reason why the animals are here, because we are consistently adapting to our environment. So to say degenerative health is inherited because of our genes, there's some truth to that, and there's not some, and then there's a misinformation about that. While it may be in the genes, our genes are responding to mind, emotions, and environment. This is why I say degeneration is passed on from generation to generation, and it's passed on the line because we adopt beliefs and behaviors that consistently motivate us to make different decisions or activate our lifestyles. I mean, what have you. So that is what contributes to the degeneration of health. That said, there's plenty of evidence to prove that breast cancer, for instance, doesn't run in families. Arthritis doesn't necessarily have to run. I mean, all of a sudden you can have one person from the family just pop up and have all these, these issues. I happen to be one of those people. But even my surgical oncologist told me that 85% of the breast cancer cases today have no family history. That should be a clue right there that something else is going on. And it is not in our bloodline. It's not the bloodline, it's the behavior line. But this is how I work with oils. And so, therefore, as I said, I started out with symptom relief, and then being introduced to epigenetics and so forth. I had a number of clinicians want me to help design oils because oils, although at that time it was still kind of sketchy to say that they were signaling molecules, and so I had to be really, really careful that they could modify a genetic, the possibility of them modifying. They can lipophilic chemicals will modify genetic expression. They will activate and deactivate. This is what medications are. This is what a lot, there's over, we have over 45 million chemicals on this planet. Thousands of them have been identified as endocrine disruptors, which means they are acting like hormones in our body, and which means signaling molecule. Essential oils are the same way, and this is where I've come to. It's like this is important, and there's so many people using them because they're currently being labeled as safe. And while they may be safe for some people, they're not safe for everybody. And so there again, just want to say that there's been an evolution in my work. So it started out as symptom relief. Then I kind of evolved into looking at the epigenome and wanting to target, specific things like the VDR, which is a vitamin D receptor, or the MTHFR, which is your and that's the folate cycle. And being able to work within that realm does have its advantages, but still it's not actually addressing the issue. So what is the issue, right? We want to point to the genes as the issue. Then you can say, well, you just said it was my behavior that's the issue. The issue is the stress response. That's the issue. And it's the mechanism, it's the chemistry of the stress response. I've talked about this consistently, especially more so lately than I ever have. And that's because the more I work with individuals and now with my own diagnoses, it's a full-on investigation because the level of degenerative health is on the rise. It's not going away. And while we have, a lot of attempts to conduct research and find a cure, the cure lies within each individual body. Now, I've never been one to believe that the oils could cure. I do know that they are very beneficial. And there was a point in my timeline that I would say that use the oils and that's all you need. And that's not even close to being the truth. Because for one, they're signaling molecules, which means they don't contain the nutrients. Now, we don't need to be megadosing on micronutrients. Really, what we need to be doing is focusing on our digestion and really helping the body break down the macronutrients. But here's the deal. The body is inflamed. The body is hyperactive right now. And I've done a series of videos on histamine alone. A lot of it was because I wanted to help people and point out to people that histamine is an issue. And I had been working a lot with epigenetics then. And, there's several genes, the DAO, where it's metabolized. The body's also equipped to deactivate histamine. I've historically said, and I still will say, that when histamine is when the histamine levels increase, estrogen levels increase. So when estrogen increases, histamine increases. Well, while I've said that, it doesn't really make, so how do these things increase, right? It doesn't really make sense. I'm not, there's no explanation. We just kind of are assuming things, but yet over the last 4.5, 5 years, there's been significant research on my part. Pardon me. I don't know why. Every time I get on here, my nose itches. But there's what is caused. I'll just, to try to keep it as concise as possible. What is causing the histamine levels to go up? What is causing the estrogen levels to go up? Well, it's the chemicals I mentioned earlier. We can activate our own stress mechanism by just worrying about stuff. Just these, as they talk about, false, evidence appearing real, hence fear. We can get ourselves all worked up over that, and that will produce cortisol. Okay. In the space of that, the system changes. So if we're going to forget, let's just forget the environment right now. Let's just say that we're chronically worried about something. Maybe it's bills, maybe it's the kids, maybe it's something going on in the family, maybe it's politics. Who knows? Whatever, it doesn't make any difference what you're worked up about. The truth is the body cannot determine what is a true threat and what is a made up threat. Now, look, I get it. Bills looming, that's a problem. Like we all want to have all our ducks in a row. I'm not discounting any level of distress. I'm not. What I'm saying is this is where we have the ability to self-regulate. Because when we're not, and this is why we're seeing so many people, insurance companies are now paying for massage. It's recommended to do breath work, yoga, get outside and get some fresh air, get some physical activity, do things that, like this stuff here, helps you get out of your head. And the reason for that is, as I said, the body cannot distinguish the difference between a true threat and one that we're just kind of perceiving as a potential threat, or stressing about something that happened yesterday, or, and what's going to come from that. All of that stuff, for as valid as it is not real in this moment. It's not happening to you right now. Yet, we've activated the stress mechanism. Estrogen is the primary signaling molecule that activates the autonomic nervous system as well as the immune system. Now, here's the interesting thing. The second you get stressed, which is the stress hormone that we're familiar with, right? Cortisol. I'm shaking this and I don't want to do that. I went like that. Cortisol. Anyway, in that space, we begin to produce something that you may or may not have ever heard of. If you've had breast cancer, then you've heard of this. But if you haven't had breast cancer and you haven't gone to the Institute for Integrative Nutrition or anything like that, you may not have heard of this. It's an enzyme called aromatase. And while when we're talking about breast cancer, and I believe in prostate cancer and possibly other cancers, because a lot of these medications are, they cross lines and they are used for different purposes. And if it looks like things are fading, it's just because the sun's bouncing in and out behind clouds. Aromatase is an enzyme that the body naturally produces, and it's found in many tissues throughout the body. And although we want to use aromatase inhibitors in the event of breast cancer, say, the challenge with that is that we're producing aromatase for a reason. Okay, it's not like some dysfunction of the body and all of a sudden it goes, hey, I need to produce aromatase because I just feel like irritating the hell out of the person that's living here. That's not what this is. There's a purpose to it, and it's in direct correlation to the amount of cortisol that's being pumped out due to stress. Or these active, like this, thing, right? Okay, that right there gets everything, like all of a sudden, immediate release of cortisol, which then produces the aromatase, which then takes and converts androgen, whatever, steroid hormones, and turns them into androgens. Pardon me, is the word I was looking for. Turns them into things like estrogen. So in women, we're producing higher levels of estrogen. In men, we're taking testosterone and converting it to estrogen, because this estrogen is needed besides just having a baby. So as I mentioned, it's part of it's what activates the autonomic nervous system as well as the immune system. And truthfully, high levels of estrogen have been indicated in almost, I think they've basically linked it to autoimmune disorders. So we're not just talking cancer here. So an aromatase inhibitor is something that actually occurs naturally or in nature. White button mushrooms is one. Broccoli is another. So there's a number of plants that actually contain aromatase inhibitors. But they're just, unless you're not, I mean, if you're only in the stages of trying to help your body and you're not been diagnosed with cancer or an autoimmune disorder, then at this point, those would be good choices. Truthfully, mangosteen. I'm going to put a link in that box below for that. Mangosteen is high in a chemical called xanthone, and xanthone has been identified to be a very good aromatase inhibitor. And it's food-based. It's not like you're taking it in a supplement form. You're actually getting it as a concentrated in the food base because it's a powder. And like I said, that link is in the box below. But the whole point to all of this is what, that alone will crank your estrogen levels. Then the second that happens, then what goes on is the lymph system slows down, the digestion is reduced. You may go, well, that doesn't make any sense. Well, yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. Because if you're truly being threatened, you're not thinking about, you're not thinking, the lymph stagnates because we freeze, because we stop moving. That's the reason why the lymph stagnates. And the more stressed we are, we tend not to be as physically active. And so physical activity helps to move the lymph system. So do some of the oils. But the fact is digestion slows down because we're not really thinking about eating a meal. We're worried about how the hell we're going to get away from something, right? But if it's just the fear of what happened or what may happen, now we are contributing to our stress levels, and we're, and unknowingly slowing down our digestion, which then interferes with our ability to break down the macronutrients. This is why I said what I said earlier. So when that goes on, we have higher levels of glucose floating around the body, or not higher levels, pardon me, larger particles of glucose floating around the body. We have larger particles of protein, unusable. So what ends up happening now, I'm sorry, you guys. The body cannot distinguish, again, the difference between a potential bacterial threat, and a large food particle. It's just these larger molecules float around, so the body starts to send things out. It's a threat. The body's a miracle. I mean, really, the way it works is an absolute miracle. But this is why it's important, because what ends up, and the reason that goes on is because once the autonomic nervous system has been activated, acetylcholine, which is used to produce hydrochloric acid in the stomach and help the bowels move, is being used for other things. Okay? So you're not making as much hydrochloric acid. So taking things like the betaine that I've got listed in the box below is a really good idea because it actually assists with breaking down these macronutrients. Again, oils can help with that. I think what I'll do instead of listing all that here is I'll just write it out, and I'll put the link in that box here too. So oil suggestions for digestion. So that said, you have, and my head's all over the place right now. I'm just trying to kind of gain control. So as I mentioned, so you have larger macronutrient molecules floating around the body then now, which, excites the immune system. And now you have the increase of histamine. So estrogen and histamine. Okay. If there are other environmental threats going on, sometimes it'll activate the histamine. Histamine is indicated in osteoarthritis. It's indicated, because of the process, the phospholipase process that becomes part of the mechanism that monitors the environment and then lets the DNA know that there's something going on, which then in fact activates the DNA to adjust itself accordingly, which now signals the need for oxidative stress and inflammation. This is occurring in every single health issue that we have. Doesn't make any difference. This is the histamine, and again, if we're just doing this with our mind, if we're just worrying about things, and I'm not saying anybody's doing anything deliberately, but if we don't get control of our mind, and some of the things I say on the radio, and I may or may have not said it here, there's 3 things we have the ability to control that no other organism has, and that is the ability to choose our words, regulate our thoughts, choose our thoughts, and the ability to control our breathing. No other species can deliberately take a deep breath. That deep breath actually begins to send signals to the parasympathetic nervous system that everything's okay. Those are 3 things that we have at our disposal every day, every minute. So being able to regulate this and remind ourselves, look, this isn't real. This isn't real. There's nothing going on right now. I'm fine right now. I'm really okay. And every time those thoughts show up, thank them for letting you know that action has to be taken and that you will get to it and everything is okay. The most important part is that you begin to let your body know that you're okay. That'll begin to start to reverse these processes. It's not that these things are irreversible, it's just that they're on chronic mode, they're on hyperdrive. So that's just with mind and emotions. Now, if we get the environment involved, which is chock full of xenoestrogens, whether they're man-made or ones found in nature, now you have those chemicals acting like estrogen in the body, signaling activation of the autonomic nervous system and the immune system, which is now going to what? It's going to begin to release histamine. This is how estrogen and histamine play off of one another. It's not because, well, estrogen's present and now the body goes, oh, there's more estrogen, so I need to produce more histamine. That's not what's going on. What's going on is that there's changes happening within the system that are activating different processes because the body isn't able to function and thrive. It's functioning and survive. So what do we do? Historically, I've talked about ways to reduce histamine. And we can chase that rabbit all we want. The way I see this going for all of us, it doesn't make a damn bit of difference what any of us is living with. The thing we need to be working on is actually reducing our estrogen levels. Because, yeah, that's how I would say that is regardless. And here, even with myself, okay, so just so you guys know, I had to go through a bunch of tests to determine where I was on the menstruation cycle as far as in my lifetime. I told my oncologist that I was definitely, I had gone through menopause 2 years ago. I didn't have a symptom, just completely stopped. Her statement to me was, well, you could be perimenopausal. So we need to determine if you're postmenopausal. Well, how do they do that? They start testing they obviously they test your hormones, and sure enough, I basically have I'm not producing any estrogen. They were really, really baffled because I'm not, how I developed the breast cancer that feeds off of this estrogen. Because keep in mind, and when aromatase is being produced, we're producing higher levels of estrogen, which is going to feed into any of these cancers, which are, by the way, I won't call them aggressive, but cancer today has become increasingly resistant, just like bacteria and virus. It's a live cell. Although it doesn't exist on its own, out in nature, it is a live cell. And it is equally as resistant to a lot of things as these bacteria and viruses. And this is the reason why if you have active cancer in your body, I don't recommend, granted, I'm not a doctor, I don't make any diagnoses, but this is what, I don't recommend just, unless you really want to, just going the straight route of natural aromatase inhibitors, because I don't know that it's going to be sufficient enough given the state of the cancer that we're facing. Including these things with a medication that blocks that would be more to your advantage. Learning how to incorporate what kind of oils with the medication you're taking really is more. I'm actually going to be doing a talk in March 9th here in Santa Fe on combining oils with chronic health issues, and more specifically along the lines of cancer. But I do believe some of the audience is going to be there with other chronic health issues. And the fact is once we're taking medication, I know, again, I've talked about this historically about, well, don't use this oil with this med because of this CYP450 enzyme and blood. I've done that. But that takes really understanding which constituent is an inducer, which one's a substrate, which one's an inhibitor. And then how is that comparing to what else you're doing? So my suggestion at this point is whatever you do not duplicate the mechanism of action. I've mentioned that before. And do not try to counter it, the medication, with, like, for instance, taking an immunosuppressant and then using immune stimulating oils and herbs and other things. Don't do it. The body is already unstable. As I said, if you're taking medications, stick with it. Please don't think that you can replace these medications with a natural, because I'm reading this investigation, you guys. These scientists are very, very clear that although these things are aromatase inhibitors or contain aromatase inhibitors, they are not sufficient enough to go up against cancer. They may be good in the prevention. And once you've been cleared, to go solely on that, but not as and look, I don't represent anybody, and as I mentioned, I have gone through pharmacology, and then I went all natural, and now I'm finding that it does take the two worlds to work together, and I'm very serious about that. So duplicating the mechanism of action is not something I recommend, and then trying to counterbalance it with something else, as in an immune stimulant, is foolish. The best thing you can do is something that's going to be soothing to the body, and it's going to be helping with the digestive system. If you do nothing else, help with the digestive system, because how your body breaks down those macronutrients will determine how well it can actually deal with and manage the medications. Yes, medications are stressful to the body. There's a handful of oils that are good for just all scenarios. Taking a chance on some of the oils that could potentially interact at the liver enzyme level is not cool. It's not recommended. And then doing some for the digestive system is quite beneficial. And again, how that works for the individual depends on the individual body and the rest of the symptoms that are going on. Because although these illnesses have the same name, they're not necessarily the same. So, again, really knocking estrogen down. If you're on medication, stick with your medication. You can also do these things alongside. Drink nettle tea. You can also, I do recommend the betaine hydrochloric acid supplement. I do recommend that. And the mangosteen. Again, there's links to all of these. You guys, I'm also an Amazon associate, so if you click on those links and decide to purchase, I do get a little bit back on that, but these are things that I'm living with at this point. I'm also taking, I'll tell you what I'm doing for myself. I started a, let me show you. I'll hold this up for you just a minute. Bear with me. Okay. So, power beets. Why? Because they help with circulation and they help produce nitric oxide, which is essential. Because nitric oxide, diminished amounts of nitric oxide are what contribute to aging, and it's not because I'm looking at this for anti-aging. Nitric oxide synthase gets knocked down in the space of these chemical toxins that were in the world. It changes. This is part of the epigenome, so it changes the way the nitric oxide synthase gene complex works, and it reduces the amount of nitric oxide. This is actually a pomegranate and beet. Okay, and the reason why is because beet's real good for the liver. It stimulates, the combination actually helps to soothe the stress response. Why? Because pomegranate is actually really good in a good source of potassium. Potassium is a natural beta blocker. I have seen in many medical journals, or medical books, textbooks rather, that when somebody presents with adrenal fatigue, to recommend to prescribe a beta blocker. So go for the natural beta blocker. us being completely burned out because of the amount of cortisol we're kicking out because of our stress requires potassium. There's a good source of foods that are, I'll include a link to that document as well. Foods that are foods that are high in potassium. But that's the reason why I chose this. That and the fact that beets is really good for the liver, and liver is where we're converting our, the liver enzymes, guys. So that's why I want a higher level of nitric oxide and supporting that part of my body. Next up was this collagen and MCT. Collagen peptides and MCT, medium chain triglycerides and collagen. Why? Because because bone. I have arthritis. I am borderline osteoporosis in my spine. I did a DEXA scan a couple weeks ago, actually 2 weeks ago today. And although they're coming back with osteopenia, we're talking about points from being classified as osteoporosis. Ossification requires collagen, as do joints require collagen. So it is possible to regain or to maintain bone strength. So I hike every day now. I do some yoga from time to time. That's not necessarily considered as much weight bearing. I am going to get back into swimming because of the resistance, especially for my hips. Because, well, yeah, if you haven't seen me before, I have arthritis in my feet, my spine, and now apparently in my hips as well. So that's why the collagen. This is the betaine supplement that I'm taking, and this is This is actually helping with hydrochloric acid levels in my stomach to actually begin to help better the breakdown of the macronutrients. And then I throw this in there. These are the hemp parts, obviously, but they're a very good source of omega-3s and omega-6. The fatty acid levels in that are superb, and it's very good for the hormonal system because it's the perfect ratio of 3s and 6s that the body can work with. Too many 6s, you get inflammation. Too many 3s, you get inflammation. And this comes in the perfect ratio. The mangosteen, that has actually arrived. I just don't have it here with me. And then I have also, I'll put that links here, and I've started my own, it's on a fermented vitamin B complex that is by New Chapter. And that is going to be, and that's in the link box. These just arrived, but I wanted you to know that this is what I'm doing for the mangosteen, although I am doing an aromatase inhibitor. And if you want to know why I'm taking aromatase inhibitors, because they left cancer in my body. I have cancer still. Although I've had the surgery, they left some behind. So I'm doing the medication, but I'm also going to do the mangosteen because I want to, because there's no evidence of me having estrogen in my body. So this tells me that there's higher levels of environmental estrogens in my body. And I'm not going to lie to you about my stress levels, but they've done the metabolic panel on my hormones, and there wasn't anything to speak of. That said, we're also seeing a rise in obesity, which is these aromatase is stored in fat tissue. So the higher the fat level on the body, and this doesn't mean obese, okay? If you look at other people's websites, you'll see they're using the words obese. Please understand, in my world, excess fat tissue, if I could show you, I would. Excess fat tissue has nothing to do with the size of your body. It's how, it's the cellulite that we women talk about. Yes, women have more fat than men, but it's the ability to build muscle and reduce fat. And if you're not able, the fat tissue, the otherwise known as adipose tissue, is actually this is why women have, okay, if you want to know something, this is why women have more fat tissue than men, because they're producing higher levels of estrogen. There's more estrogen in a woman's body naturally, and with the stress, it's packing on the extra adipose tissue. That's part of the endocrine system. The body is also producing other steroid hormones because aromatase is involved in the production of steroidal hormones, and it relies on the NADPH, which is the fermentation cycle. This is where we break down sugars for further use in the body. It relies on that. So it's taking sugars. So when we eat more sugar or sweets, It feeds on that. Okay, this is a lot of information, and I've gone long. So if you've made it this far, thanks. But this is why doing things like this is significant. So when we see people with aromatase sensitive issues or estrogen related health issues like autoimmune and cancer, chances are the fat tissue on that body is going to be greater. The proportion of it to muscle is going to be greater. Again, it's not how big you are, it's the amount of fat tissue that you have in comparison to your muscle. And the one thing I've never been able to do is be able to build muscle. I have been on a plant-based diet for 50 years. That's right, since I was eating table food. And where was the collagen, right? So what I did unknowingly, and we didn't know anything back then, but really having a balanced diet of, fats and proteins and, and good carbs is essential because we need all those nutrients. But I wasn't really using the fat that I was taking in. I wasn't really getting, and I wasn't building any muscle. So I have a tendency to carry more fat on my body, and I don't want to hear anymore. It's because you're a woman. That's why you have fat on your body. I have fat on my body because my body's not breaking it down, and the hormonal system is screwed up because of stress. So aromatase, again, is involved in the production of a number of steroidal hormones that will now begin to even act like thyroid hormone. Your thyroid hormone levels may be tested out naturally, but they're actually, these other hormones are taking the place and acting like it. So it becomes a clusterfuck, pardon me, it's just a shitstorm of chemicals. So if we can get in here and really begin to mindfully self-soothe, do things that are going to assist the liver, and why this? Because, well, this and this combined is necessary. This is obviously, I'm making hormones, but I need to help regulate the hormonal system. So this is why good fats are recommended, because they help the body release stored fat tissue. I'm not doing this to lose fat tissue. I'm doing this because that's a good source of protein for me, and it has really good omegas, the proper ratio, and I really want to help cut down on the inflammation. So everything I'm saying here is not necessarily about losing weight or losing fat. It's about helping the body chemically regulate itself and de-escalate the stress response. And like I said, I can list out oils for you that are good for the digestive system, and I'll do that in a separate piece because this is going long. But I will tell you one thing. Roman chamomile, which is safe for everything. It's not going to be a problem for anybody. Roman chamomile essential oil actually helps to lower the ACTH, which is another chemical that's produced during the stress response, and that's right alongside with cortisol. Okay, so there's a lot of it's a very complicated system, but just know that the stress mechanism just basically alters the entire system, and we start to produce different chemicals for the protection of the organism. And our job is to basically let our body know that we're partnering with it and we're helping it be safe. And yes, there's environmental shit going on. There is. But the more that we do this kind of stuff and we focus on our digestion and we actually help continually soothe our system at the cellular level, now we are on to being able to thrive. So that's the reason why I share these things with you. And please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you. Almost 45 minutes into this. I appreciate you guys very, very much. And I'm sure I've left something out, but I got as much in as I could possibly do. Anyway, I appreciate you guys. I love you guys. And I look forward to hearing from you. Until then, be well.